Please join with me in prayer. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words that you hear be captured by your soul and enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. Since I retired, it's been 14 years now. I'm just reflecting the other day that I've been as long retired as I was minister in Vernon, which was the longest pastorate I had. So this is going to be the longest pastorate playing in retirement. Anyway, since I retired 14 years ago, the one part of my ministry that I've continued uninterrupted has been pastoral care, and especially weddings and funerals. Like almost every minister I've talked to, I prefer doing funerals to doing weddings. A word of caution to you or your children or grandchildren if they're planning a wedding. The more elaborate the wedding plans, the more that can go wrong, as I've discovered over the years doing weddings. But the reason I think that we clergy like doing funerals is because it's a real privilege that families give us to share with them during this most intimate and personal time in their lives. At such times, families are the most open and the most vulnerable. And if we honor and protect that vulnerability, then we often share an intimacy that few people get to experience. And we get to experience that all the time. Sometimes I hear people comment that it must be very difficult to officiate at a funeral if you don't know the person who has died. It's not really difficult. When you have a chance to sit with the family and hear them share their stories, we can come to know that person who has died quite well. When the family is not as open as most families are, then it does become difficult. And what's difficult about it is when the family isn't open, they often just are profuse in their praise of that person who has died until that person comes across as a saint. And then it's difficult to know what to say about that. First of all, I have to admit I haven't met many saints, so I'm not sure how to talk about them. And secondly, if I'm honest, many of the saints that I've met, I haven't particularly liked. So it's hard to talk about a person when you end up kind of not really liking them so much. And the third problem is the big problem. That is that sometimes if this person is painted as a saint, and if you talk about them in the services if they're a saint, and if someone in the family has had some difficulties relating to that person through their life, then you end up with this person who has died is a saint. And I haven't been able to sort of relate to them very well, so what does that make me? I found that when my antennae go up at times like that, I gently probe a little more. And then the family often shares some less saintly stories of the person. That doesn't mean that I'm going to use those stories in the service, but it does mean that what I might say about the person is a little more nuanced than it might be with just the one-dimensional view of the person. When my mother died, the minister who officiated the service was a close personal friend who also happened to be the minister for my brother and his family. From time to time over the years, my mother and I had struggled with our relationship. When she died, we were in a good space, but it hadn't always been like that. And when I and my brother and his family met with Jim to plan the service, I said to him, "My mother was a good person, but she wasn't a saint. Don't make her into a saint." Jim honored my request by using as scripture in the service the passage by Paul, which was our service version this morning. "For it is the God who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' who has shone in our hearts. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us." So what is Paul saying here? He talks about this extraordinary power within us that belongs to God. He calls it the light of God that shines in our heart. I think he's trying to describe something that's indescribable, and many people have used many different ways of trying to talk about it. Julian of Norwich said, "We are not just made by God, we are made of God." That somehow in the core of our being, we are made of God. My favorite Celtic mentor, Philip Newell, says, "Deep within us is the wisdom, the creativity, the love longing of God." I've talked about God being grounded in God. Jim talks about unconditional love. We're trying to use language that is difficult to use because we're trying to describe something which in the book that we've read with the children is something that doesn't exist. It's hard to put words to it. And yet, I think when we talk about it and share examples of it, almost all of us can relate to it because we felt that within ourselves. Somehow, the words don't matter so much as the connection with our feelings, with our senses, with our experience. So, Paul says that we carry this treasure, this light within us. We carry this treasure in clay jars. And my friend Jim, when he used it in the service, translated it from, didn't use the word clay jars. He used the word alabaster bowls. We carry this treasure in alabaster bowls. He did that because, as you know, alabaster is a rock that's kind of translucent, and the light can kind of shine through it. He said that sometimes that alabaster bowl that we carry the light in is so thin that it's almost transparent, and the light within shines out so that everyone can see it. And sometimes the bowl that we carry this light in is so thick that it's as if there's no light at all. And all of us are both and. Sometimes our bowls are so thin that the light shines through. Sometimes our bowls are so thick that people have to really search to find any light inside. But it's there. The light is not dependent on the bowl. It's there in its full glory, whether it is seen by others or not. I'd never heard this passage interpreted in this way, and it has stuck with me ever since. And that's why I wanted to share it with you. It reminds me that if I'm struggling with a person that I don't relate to well, or who does not come across to me as genuine, that doesn't mean that they don't have this treasure, this inner light. It just means that I'm not seeing it. Paul says that it isn't we who produce the light, the inner light. In other words, it isn't that some of us have the inner light and some of us don't. We are all blessed with that inner light of God. The only choice we have is whether we're going to display it or not. But when Paul wrote this, he was not talking about others. He was talking about himself. And as Isabel said, he was talking about the struggle he was having with other people who were denigrating him, trying to destroy his ministry. And what is in him is in each of us as well, deeper within us than we usually go. There is a strength there that we can experience and count on. Paul says we should trust this inner light that's deep within us. He says that when we do, though we may be afflicted, we're not crushed. In his case, people may say and do things that denigrate and condemn him, but at his core, he has a confidence that he says comes from God and cannot be overcome by whatever others may say or do. We may lose employment. We may be faced with broken relationships. We may be afflicted by the trials of advancing age. But if we reach into our core, we will find there a sense that we are strong enough to pass through those afflictions and find a steady, sure footing on the other side. Count on it. It's been there before in our lives. We've experienced it in some of the trials that we faced. And it is there still if you reach down inside. We may be perplexed, he says, but we will not be driven to despair. The way forward in our lives may not be obvious to us. We may be dogged by doubts that we can face the road ahead, or anxiety about our ability to get through it all. But if we center in our core and the knowledge that the strength within us has not deserted us up to now, we will find that we already know the way that we must move ahead. It is clear that we have let those doubts or anxieties smother that inner strength, but it continues to be there and it can serve us if we are open to it. Paul says that when we're struck down, we're not destroyed. That doesn't mean that illness or injury will not strike us down, and we may not recover from it. But that doesn't mean that the person we are will be destroyed by whatever strikes us down. At our core is a strength that will keep us whole and strong, whatever adversity strikes us. And that is when the inner light of God often shines out the brightest, when hit by adversity. As Julie said this morning in the example of the family who celebrated in the midst of a fire that might destroy their home. Somehow they found within themselves that strength, that light, that they were going to celebrate life even in the midst of adversity. As I said at the beginning, families that have lost a loved one find themselves to be open to each other in ways that they're never otherwise open, able to give strength and love to each other in ways they do not otherwise share. I'm embarrassed to admit that I have come away from hospital visits to people who are dying, who are in the last stages of life, come away with a kind of a euphoria because they've got such a thin, transparent bowl that you can see the light shining through. People who have found that strong inner light even in the face of death. It is then that that inner light shines through alabaster bowls with walls so thin and transparent that the whole world is bathed in its light. It's there, that inner light and strength of God. It's there in each one of us. Paul says that we should trust it. It is really the core of who we are.